Welcome to Shatter.
She said it in front of the glass wall, the kind that makes every reflection feel like an audience. The office was still half lit, the city outside already dark. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She said I only wanted one thing. She said it like a verdict, not an accusation. Like she was done arguing a case that had already been decided. Her phone was face down on the table. Mine was still in my jacket. The silence between us wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. I didn't answer. I picked up my keys. I left the room the way I always did, without slamming anything. That night we hosted a small dinner. Clients, one partner couple, and 2 people from my team. Everything was familiar. The plates, the lighting, the way she moved through the room like she owned the attention and had already decided where to spend it. Evan was there, my lead engineer. He had been in my company for 4 years. He knew where the spare keys were kept. He knew which cabinet stuck. He knew the schedule better than I did because I trusted him to. She stood close to him while pouring wine. Too close for too long. When she laughed, she touched his arm, not mine. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't bold either. It was calibrated. I watched from across the table. I refilled water glasses. I cleared plates. I nodded at the right moments. Evan avoided my eyes. Not fully, just enough. Later that night, after everyone left, she didn't follow me upstairs. She stayed in the kitchen, scrolling, tapping, smiling at something that wasn't me. I took a shower. I folded my clothes. I set my phone on the dresser and turned the screen down. At 12:17 a.m., my phone vibrated once. A notification preview lit the room for half a second before fading. I didn't pick it up. The next morning, she left early. Evan arrived at the office before I did. When I walked in, he was already at his desk, focused, efficient, exactly how I had trained him to be. I passed him without stopping. I opened my office. I closed the door. I sat down and started moving things from one folder to another. At 11:46 p.m. that night, another message came through. An image preview this time. Cropped. Accidental. Sent, and then immediately unsent. I didn't open it. I gave her exactly what she said I wanted. Nothing. By Thursday, the office rhythm had shifted. Not visibly. Not enough for anyone to comment. But the timing was off by seconds. Evan arrived earlier than usual and left later. He stopped coming into my office without a reason. He started sending updates instead of walking them over. At noon, my operations manager forwarded a calendar request that wasn't meant for me. A private off-site meeting. My wife's name wasn't on it, but the location was a boutique hotel 10 minutes from our house. The same one she recommended to visiting partners because it was quiet and discreet. I didn't decline the invite. I didn't accept it either. I let it sit. That afternoon, my wife stopped by the office unannounced. She said she was in the area. She wore something deliberate but understated, the kind of outfit that pretended not to be chosen. She didn't come into my office. She went straight to the common area where Evan was reviewing schematics with 2 junior engineers. She leaned over his chair. Her hand rested on the back of it for a second longer than necessary. When she spoke, she kept her voice low. Not secretive. Controlled. I stayed where I was. Through the glass, I watched Evan nod too quickly. His posture tightened. When he looked up, his eyes flicked toward my door and then away. She didn't come see me before she left. Later, an email came through from a client asking why Evan had been added to a strategic call without notice. The tone was polite. The timing wasn't. I replied with one sentence and reassigned the call to another engineer. At home that night, she talked about a potential partnership opportunity. She spoke in broad terms, using words like alignment and growth. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. Her phone stayed face up on the counter this time. Notifications were muted. At 11:58 p.m., a message came through anyway. I saw the name before the screen dimmed. Evan. I didn't reach for the phone. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. The next morning, HR flagged an anomaly in access logs. Evan had entered the building on a Sunday afternoon. He didn't log a task. He didn't badge out until after midnight. I thanked them for the diligence. I told them not to worry about it. At 12:03 a.m. that night, another image arrived. Different angle. Same intent. Sent with no text. Followed by silence. I left it unopened and set my phone to airplane mode. By the end of the week, I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't asking questions. I was watching patterns settle into place, quietly, like a structure revealing its load points. And once you see where the weight actually rests, you don't push. You adjust the supports and let gravity do the rest. By the following Monday, everything was confirmed without a single confrontation. It didn't arrive as a revelation. It arrived as logistics. I opened a shared drive I rarely checked anymore. A folder had been renamed. Not incorrectly, just confidently. Evan's initials were on files he had no reason to own alone. Project timelines were duplicated. Versions existed that I had never signed off on. Notes were added in a tone I recognized from home, not work. Strategic suggestions. Soft pressure. Familiar phrasing. At 9:40 a.m., my wife's car was in the parking lot. She hadn't told me she was stopping by. She never did when there was something to manage. She walked past my office again. Didn't look in. Evan stood when she arrived at his desk. Too fast. She smiled the way she used to smile at donors and partners, not at me anymore. The smile that said control without asking for permission. I didn't interrupt. I forwarded 2 internal emails and reassigned a deadline. Quiet changes. Structural ones. At lunch, an expense report crossed my desk. Evan had submitted it late. Hotel charges. The same boutique place. 2 nights. 1 room. Corporate card. He hadn't even tried to disguise it. I approved it. That afternoon, I removed Evan from a long-term infrastructure project without notifying him. The system sent an automated update. No explanation. Just a change in responsibility. At home, my wife talked more than usual. She filled the space with activity. Plans. Dinners. Trips we might take. She didn't touch me. She didn't need to. She watched instead. Waiting for reaction. Waiting for confirmation that I still played the same role. I kept my responses short. Neutral. Functional. At 11:52 p.m. The phone buzzed again. This time the image wasn't accidental. It lingered on the screen. A deliberate frame. No face. No message. A question without words. I set the phone down and turned off the lamp. The next morning, Evan sent a message asking if we could talk. He said it was about alignment. About clarity. About expectations. I didn't respond. Instead, I scheduled a board check-in for the following week and invited everyone except him. I asked legal to review access protocols. I moved 2 recommendation letters from pending to archived. Nothing dramatic happened. No voices were raised. No truths were spoken out loud. But by Friday, Evan was no longer essential. By Sunday, my wife was no longer certain. And by the time the next image came through at midnight, there was something new beneath it. Not desire. Urgency. And urgency is what shows up when leverage starts slipping. I stopped sleeping at home without announcing it. The first night, I said I had an early site visit. The second night, I didn't say anything at all. By the third, she stopped asking. I moved into a short-term apartment 15 minutes from the office. Same city. Same routine. Different perimeter. I kept my phone on, but notifications were filtered. Her name stayed unblocked. I wanted the signal, not the noise. At work, the shift became measurable. Evan noticed it before anyone else did. His access requests started coming through my assistant instead of directly to me. He asked for approvals he never needed before. He started copying more people on emails. He stopped improvising. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn him. I reassigned 2 more projects and transferred a client relationship to another team lead. The system logged everything. The system didn't explain anything. My wife started showing up where I was expected to be. Industry mixers. Partner dinners. Networking events she used to skip unless there was something to gain. She arrived alone, but she scanned rooms the way people do when they're looking for an exit they didn't plan. I stayed calm. I stayed brief. I spoke to people. I didn't stand next to her. Someone asked if we were still working together on partnerships. I answered without hesitation and without detail. I said the structure had changed. That night, she sent a message asking where I was staying. Not accusatory. Not emotional. Tactical. I didn't reply. At 12:21 a.m., an image came through. Different lighting. A mirror this time. The kind of picture meant to look spontaneous, but wasn't. It stayed on my screen until it dimmed. I didn't touch it. The following morning, Evan requested a one-on-one meeting again. This time, he marked it urgent. He used words like misunderstanding and respect. He said he valued the opportunity one had given him. I declined the meeting without adding a reason. By the end of the week, HR informed me that Evan had asked about internal transfers. He wanted to know if his position was secure. He wanted reassurance. I thanked them and told them to hold off. That weekend, my wife came by the apartment uninvited. She stood in the hallway when I opened the door. She didn't step inside. She looked past me instead, like she was checking if this version of my life had room for her. I didn't invite her in. She left without raising her voice, without tears, without closure. At midnight, the phone buzzed again. No image this time, just a missed call. I let it ring until it stopped. Silence, when it's intentional, doesn't feel empty. It feels occupied. The pressure didn't spike. It redistributed. On Monday morning, I moved Evan off the internal roadmap entirely. Not fired, not suspended, just removed from anything that touched future planning. He was assigned maintenance tasks and documentation review. Necessary work. Invisible work. He noticed within the hour. By noon, he sent a long email. Professional. Careful. He framed it as concern for continuity and asked if there had been a change in my expectations of his role. He CC'd HR. He CC'd legal. He CC'd people he thought might protect him. I replied with 2 sentences and no warmth. I thanked him for flagging the issue and told him the current structure reflected company priorities. Nothing else. That afternoon, my wife posted a photo from a cafe downtown. Not tagged. Not captioned. Just visible enough to be seen. Evan liked it within minutes. He unliked it 5 minutes later. I didn't react. At a partner meeting that evening, I arrived alone. I always had before. This time it was noticed. Someone asked where she was. I said she was focusing on other initiatives. I didn't elaborate. The conversation moved on. At 10:48 p.m., my phone buzzed again. An image came through. This one was closer. Framed tighter. No attempt at subtlety. It stayed visible longer than the others, like she was watching to see if it was opened. I left it unopened and set the phone face down. The next day, Evan requested sick leave. 2 days. Then 3. HR forwarded the note without comment. I approved it without comment. On Thursday, a client asked if Evan was still their technical lead. I said no and introduced his replacement. The transition was clean, faster than expected. By Friday, Evan's name no longer came up in meetings. His influence drained without announcement. The system didn't collapse. It stabilized. That night, my wife showed up at a networking event I was attending. She stood across the room, watching me speak with a vendor she had once introduced. She waited for me to look back. I didn't. Later, she left early. Her car passed mine in the parking lot. She slowed as she drove by. I didn't turn my head. At 12:06 a.m., the message tone changed. No image. Just text. Short. Careful. Asking if we could talk. Saying things felt off. Saying she didn't recognize me anymore. I didn't answer. By then, the roles had already shifted. Evan was no longer inside the system. She was no longer directing it. And the quiet they were both reacting to wasn't confusion. It was consequence, arriving without drama. The separation became public without an announcement. At a quarterly industry breakfast, I arrived alone again. This time, no one asked where she was. The silence around her absence had already settled. People adjusted faster than expected when given no explanation. She arrived late. Not with me. Not invited by anyone I knew. She moved through the room with the same confidence she always used, but it didn't land the same way. Conversations paused when she approached. Smiles tightened. People acknowledged her and then turned back to their plates. I stayed where I was. I didn't look for her. I didn't avoid her either. I spoke to partners, shook hands, discussed timelines. I didn't reference anything personal. Across the room, she watched. Not passively, actively, measuring, waiting for a signal that never came. Someone asked me about a joint initiative she had once overseen. I said the scope had changed and that we were reassessing external involvement. I said it calmly. I said it publicly. That was the first crack she couldn't manage. Later that afternoon, I was CC'd on an email chain between her and a former partner. The tone was strained. The response time was slow. The leverage she once had wasn't there anymore. By evening, Evan's name surfaced again, but not from me. A colleague mentioned he'd been removed from a high-visibility task force. Another asked if he was transitioning out. No one said it directly, but everyone understood. She tried to intercept me in the parking garage after the event. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She stood close enough for people to notice and asked if we could talk privately. I said it wasn't the right time. That answer traveled faster than any explanation could have. At home, her social activity spiked. Stories, posts, photos meant to suggest momentum. None of them tagged. None of them anchored. Just movement without direction. At midnight, the image came back. This time it wasn't framed to entice. It was framed to remind. A place we used to go. An angle I recognized. No caption. I didn't respond. The next morning, a mutual contact asked if everything was okay. Not out of concern. Out of curiosity. I said things were stable. By the end of the week, invitations stopped coming to her directly. They came to me. Evan's sick leave turned into an extended absence. HR asked if I wanted to begin succession planning. I said yes. She didn't lose anything in a single moment. That would have been easier. She lost it in increments, each one small enough to dismiss until the accumulation became visible to everyone else. And when she finally understood that the room had shifted without her consent, she realized something she couldn't negotiate her way out of. Control only works while the system responds. She started reaching out sideways. Not to me directly at first. To people adjacent to me. Old contacts. Mutual acquaintances. Former partners who still had my number. The messages were casual on the surface, framed as check-ins or updates. Underneath, they carried the same question. Where was I standing, and was there still room beside me? The answers she got were polite and useless. I stayed visible, but unavailable. I kept my routine intact. Morning meetings. Site visits. Dinners where my seat was singular and intentional. I didn't rush. I didn't explain. I didn't correct assumptions. At the office, Evan's absence turned permanent without ceremony. His access was revoked quietly. His files were reassigned. His desk was cleared after hours. No goodbye email. No exit interview that anyone talked about. People noticed the efficiency. My wife noticed the isolation. She showed up at a charity fundraiser we used to attend together. She stood near the entrance, scanning faces, waiting for recognition that didn't come. When someone did stop to speak with her, the conversation stayed brief. Professional. Contained. I spoke on a panel that night. Answered questions. Shook hands. I didn't look toward the entrance. Later, a message came through from her. Not an image this time. A sentence. Short. Controlled. Asking if we could just talk like adults. I left it unread. At home, she started posting less. The story stopped. The cafe photos disappeared. The silence online wasn't strategic anymore. It was cautious. At midnight, the images returned. Not provocative. Familiar. Corners of rooms. Details she knew I'd recognize. A lamp. A window. A place where something used to exist. I didn't respond. The next morning, a colleague mentioned she had reached out asking about an introduction. He said it felt awkward. He said he didn't follow up. I thanked him and changed the subject. By the end of the week, she came to the apartment again. She knocked this time. She waited. When I opened the door, she looked relieved just to see me standing there. She didn't step inside. She didn't touch me. She talked about timing, about pressure, about misunderstandings that had grown legs. I listened without reacting. When she finished, she waited for a response. Any response. I told her I had a meeting and closed the door. That night, there were no messages, no images, no missed calls. The quiet wasn't her choice this time. And that was the moment she began to understand that being seen isn't the same as being needed, and access isn't something you can demand back once it's been withdrawn. Some distances don't announce themselves. They just hold. The confrontation didn't arrive as a blow-up. It arrived as timing. She caught me on a Sunday afternoon outside the building where my office was. Not inside. Not at home. Neutral ground. She waited until I was locking my car before she spoke. She didn't accuse. She didn't apologize. She adjusted her tone instead, lowering it, steadying it, the way she used to when she needed cooperation rather than permission. She said she didn't understand what was happening. She said things had shifted without explanation. She said silence felt like punishment. I didn't argue with any of it. She asked if Evan had anything to do with this. The name came out carefully, like she was testing how much it weighed now. I didn't answer. I looked past her and checked the street before stepping around her. She followed me for a few steps. Not chasing. Keeping pace. She said she felt erased. She said I was acting like a stranger. She said she missed how things were before everything got complicated. I stopped walking. Not to turn toward her. Just to stop. That pause did more than any sentence could have. She filled it immediately, adding context, explanations, framing events as misunderstandings that had spiraled. She didn't mention trust. She didn't mention loyalty. She talked about pressure and timing and feeling unseen. I listened. I didn't nod. I didn't disagree. When she finished, she waited again. This time longer. Her face held that familiar expression, the one that expected a pivot. A softening. A negotiation. I said one sentence. Calm. Even. Not raised. Not lowered. I said I wasn't available for this conversation. I unlocked the door and got in the car. She stood there while I started the engine. She didn't knock on the window. She didn't call my name. She stepped back as I pulled away, like she finally understood that whatever leverage she thought she had left didn't apply here. That night, there were no images, no messages, no midnight interruptions. The next day, she sent a single text asking if this was really how it was going to end. I didn't answer, because by then, it already had. Not with anger, not with closure, with absence that didn't ask to be filled, and the realization that the man she was trying to reach no longer occupied the position she remembered. Not emotionally, not structurally, not at all. The collapse didn't look like a breakdown. It looked like misalignment. Her calendar emptied first. Meetings she used to anchor were reassigned or quietly canceled. Invitations arrived later, then stopped arriving at all. People she once called directly started looping in someone else before responding. The tone shifted from collaborative to cautious. I heard about it secondhand, not as gossip, as updates delivered without emphasis. At work, the last trace of Evan dissolved. Legal finalized the separation. His departure was framed as a personal decision. No announcement, no farewell. His name stopped appearing in threads. His LinkedIn updated weeks later. A lateral move. A smaller firm. Less visibility. The system absorbed it without disruption. She tried to re-enter that system anyway. She reached out to a former partner with a proposal that mirrored something we had once discussed privately. The response came back delayed and diluted. Interest without urgency. Politeness without momentum. She showed up at another event uninvited. This time, she stayed near the edges. Watched conversations from a distance. When she approached a group, the circle adjusted without making space. I arrived later. I spoke with people she recognized. I didn't acknowledge her presence. I didn't need to. Someone asked if I was doing well. I said things were steady. That night, she sent 3 messages in a row. No images. No framing. Just words this time. Short sentences. Asking if we could reset. Saying she finally understood what she had taken for granted. Saying she didn't realize how much support she had lost until it was gone. I read them. I didn't respond. The following week, a mutual contact mentioned she seemed exhausted. He said she looked different. Less controlled. Like someone managing too many variables with no leverage left. I nodded and moved the conversation on. At midnight, another image came through. Not curated. Not angled. Just her reflection in a dark window. No caption. No follow-up. I didn't open it. By then, her attempts weren't about connection. They were about orientation. Trying to locate herself relative to me, the way she always had. But I wasn't a reference point anymore. The collapse wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with tears or apologies. It arrived as a series of closed doors she didn't know how to open without me standing beside her. And for the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't choosing. She was reacting. That's what happens when control disappears quietly. There's no one to fight. Only space where influence used to be. The last message came later than the others. Not at midnight. Not framed to catch me off guard. It arrived in the afternoon, during a gap between meetings, like she had finally learned my schedule instead of testing it. There was no image. She wrote that she understood now, that she had confused control with closeness, that when she said I only wanted one thing, she hadn't meant to reduce me. She said she had been afraid of needing me more than I needed her. She said she could see how that fear had turned into something else. I read it once. I didn't sit with it. I didn't reread it. I locked my phone and put it back in my pocket. That evening, I attended a small dinner with 2 partners and a client who had been on the fence for months. We talked numbers, timelines, expansion. I spoke clearly. I listened carefully. The agreement closed without friction. When I left, the street was quiet. My car was where I left it. My life felt proportioned again. She didn't send anything that night. The next week, I saw her across a crowded room one last time. Not intentionally, just overlap. She looked thinner, more exposed. She watched me the way people watch a place they used to live in, trying to match memory to reality. I nodded once. Polite. Neutral. She didn't come over. Later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned she had taken time off. That she was recalibrating. That she said losing me had forced her to look at how she used people instead of meeting them. I didn't comment. At midnight, my phone stayed still. No images. No signals. No attempts to recover a position that no longer existed. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. That choice didn't require distance across cities or a dramatic ending. It required precision. Removal. Silence that didn't ask to be filled. She learned something through the absence. Evan learned something through exclusion. The system learned something through stability. And I learned that when you stop negotiating your value, everything else reorganizes around that decision. Not loudly, correctly. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was complete.